"That's not my daughter. That's a uniform mistake." He said it like it was a joke. But the worst part wasn't the insult, it was the silence that followed. Dozens of people in that room and not one looked at me. Plates clinked, champagne flowed, and they all just kept eating. Like I wasn't there, like I never was. What kind of father saves his sharpest knife for the toast? Before we dive in, let me know what time are you listening to this and where are you? Drop a comment below, we'd love to hear from you. I was sitting near the back end of the last row. When they reached my row, the name cards were gone. Or maybe they didn't bother. Someone scribbled Marine with a dying pen on a folded paper napkin and called it good. There was a spot of mustard on the corner. I worried the edge of the napkin as he rose to make his toast. My father, Clayton Elridge, in his third suit for his third marriage. His tie was crooked. Kendra had probably tied it for him. He raised a glass. To love, to loyalty, and to real family. A thin ripple of laughter skittered across the room. He glanced around like he was a stand-up act waiting for his cue. Then he looked at me, pointed clear as day. "That's just a bastard," he tossed out glass, tilted toward me. This, he turned to Kendra, glowing in a champagne-colored gown, is my real daughter. Everything in me locked, as if the room had snapped shut. Someone at the next table asked, "Is she even invited?" And another, "I thought she was military. I mean, does she even carry his last name?" I did. I carried it for 39 years, along with the silence, the half-invitations, the last-minute changes, the wrong names on every holiday card. But the worst part wasn't the insult, it was the plates and forks clattering on as if nothing had landed. Nobody stood. Nobody said, "Hey, that's enough." Even the DJ just lowered the volume like giving the insult space to settle. Plates clinked, champagne moved, and they kept chewing through it. I looked around, saw my cousin slicing into cake like nothing had happened. My uncle laughed, and poured himself another drink. And Kendra. She didn't blink, just sipped her wine eyes locked on her glass like it might show her a way out. I don't know what hit harder, the sentence or how the room absorbed it like ritual. I rose without a word. My chair screeched backward on the linoleum, sharp enough to turn a few heads. But no one stopped me. No one followed. No one asked if I was okay. Outside, the air smelled like cigarette smoke and honeysuckle. Cicadas buzzed along the edges of the parking lot. Somewhere out of sight, someone was laughing again. I walked to my car, sat behind the wheel, and stared ahead for a long time. I pulled out of the lot and pointed the car toward Route 3, not home. Not that kind of home anyway. To a diner near the edge of town. The kind with counters chipped at the corners and booths with patched vinyl. The kind where the coffee's always burnt and the waitresses don't ask questions. The neon letters flickered once in the rearview mirror as I cut the engine. I stayed there, parked at the far edge of the lot, the glow from the diner bleeding only halfway across the windshield. The heater clicked once, then fell silent. Fog curled in from the tree line as if it had been waiting for me. My hands tightened around the paper cup until the lid crumpled. Lukewarm water spilled sideways, dampening the torn sleeve, where my thumb pressed too hard. I hadn't even realized I'd carried it out with me. Maybe I just needed something solid to hold. I looked down at my lap. The soft gray dress was wrinkled now, clinging awkwardly to my knees. I'd picked it because it blended in. Nothing too tight, nothing too bright. Something respectful, quiet. I'd even worn the sensible heels, the ones that made my calves ache but didn't click too loudly on the floor. That's the thing about trying not to make a scene. People still find ways to drag you into one. He knew exactly where I was sitting. He always did. That's how he raised me on the outskirts but in range. Always available for when he needed to perform some version of fatherhood. And when he stood up with his champagne glass eyes sweeping across the crowd like a politician, he saved his sharpest line for me. "That's just a bastard." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't smirk, just said it plain like he was describing the weather. The line hung there for a moment. Then the music came back, the chatter returned, and it was like I'd never been there at all. I still hadn't moved. The fog outside was thicker now, creeping over the windshield in slow, swirling patterns. From my angle, the hall looked like a distant lantern behind smoked glass. Blurred shadows floated past the windows, guests dancing servers, clearing plates, maybe even Kendra showing off her ring again. I reached over and opened the glove box half on instinct. Inside, under old napkins and a faded state inspection receipt, was a small velvet pouch. The pin. It had belonged to my mother. Not expensive, just a silver eagle wing perched on an olive branch. One of those little things older women used to wear on their Sunday best or at the PTA meeting. She wore it every time she had to go somewhere important. Small armor, she'd called it. The back was scratched and dull, but the words were still there, etched deep. Fight when you must, but always clean. She would have hated tonight. Not because of what he said she'd seen worse come out of his mouth, but because of how I let it land, because I sat there, because I didn't raise my voice or flip the table or shatter a wine glass just to hear it break. But she also would have understood. Some battles, she once told me, don't deserve a war cry, just a better memory than the people who started them. I stared at the pin resting in my palm, cool and a little dusty. Then I picked up my phone. Isaac answered on the second ring. He said it out loud, he asked. Yeah, I said, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror, in front of everyone. There was a silence. Not the kind that made you uncomfortable, but the kind that lets you breathe. Then let them see who you are. That was all he said, and it was enough. I sat with that for a long time. Let it sink into the part of me that still hadn't decided whether to drive straight into the night or park here until the fog swallowed the car whole. If he hadn't answered, if I hadn't found the pin, maybe I wouldn't have gone anywhere at all. I reached into the back seat and pulled the garment bag onto my lap, unzipped it. Inside my uniform was still crisp, freshly dry cleaned. I didn't put it on. I just hung it on the hook behind the driver's seat where it could rest upright. The name tag Elridge caught the soft glow from the dome light. Still mine. The hall was completely gone behind the fog now, just a dim shape in the distance. I turned the key, the engine humming low and steady. I shifted into reverse gravel, crunching under the tires as I pulled onto the road and let the headlights cut through the dark. I slid into the booth and set the cup down. A faint ring of water formed on the cracked formica, dissolving slowly. The coffee was cold. I cupped it anyway, hunting for warmth. Outside the window, the fog pressed in like a second wall. Beyond it, the parking lot dissolved into a handful of blurred outlines, a rusted Jeep, 2 pickups, and the far-off glow of brake lights smudging red. Inside, the air carried burnt toast and fryer grease, heavy in the vents. The booths leaned against the walls like furniture that had seen too much. Nothing about this place ever changed. The edges always smelled faintly of bleach and syrup, and the windows never quite cleared, no matter how much you wiped them. Most of the crowd came from the base young recruits still figuring out how to sit without bracing retirees, who only stood when someone said attention, and the in-betweens like me. People who didn't need company, just a corner to occupy. Somewhere with noise but no questions. The waitress topped off my cup twice without meeting my eyes. She refilled out of habit, not belief I'd touch it. I didn't. The cup sat between my palms, more anchor than comfort. The chill had crept up my spine, not from the cold, but from what I hadn't allowed myself to feel earlier. The kind of hurt that blooms only after the adrenaline drains. Quiet, expanding. From behind me, a leather creaked and ceramic clinked. A pair of older men slid into the booth just behind mine. Voices followed loud, sure of themselves, full of opinions shaped by half-truths and radio static. You hear what Clayton said at that wedding, one asked, tone low but not private. Called her a bastard, right there in front of God and everybody. The second man let out a sharp, flat chuckle. Not surprise, not disgust, just entertainment. And she stayed, please. You don't sit there and take that unless you think you deserve it. A knot tightened between my shoulders, and I kept facing the window. My fingers slipped from the cup to my lap. The muscles in my neck held. They didn't know I was there. And maybe that was the worst part, that I'd become invisible to men who once called me by name. I hooked my bag off the seat and set it beside me, pulling out a folder with a worn spine and dog-eared corners. I unfolded it slowly on the table, smoothing it flat with both hands. Kendra's personnel record stared back at me. According to the summary, she'd been installed as a junior strategic advisor under Colonel Horvath. The office was high clearance, high stakes, generally reserved for officers with field command under their belt. Kendra She hadn't led a single unit, hadn't passed the mid-level tactics exam, no command certification, no relevant hours logged. Yet there she was, strategic advisor. Someone had cleared her. I slid a red pen from the side pocket of my bag, uncapped it, scored the discrepancies with clean circles, not anger. The pen hovered over the bottom line where the recommendation signature would go. I held the signature back. Marines don't air dirty laundry, my mother once told me, but they don't wear it either. I thought of that while reviewing the next sheet, a memo with Elridge's signature dated months after his official retirement from external advisory. Unauthorized, invalid. But in this system, sometimes invalid was just a formality. Across from me, the waitress slipped the check onto the table, face down, her fingers barely brushing the laminate. I nodded without looking up. She moved like someone used to not being noticed. Then the bell above the diner door jingled. A young woman stepped in. Her uniform still had hard creases like it had come straight from the dry cleaner. Hair tucked neatly. Boots shined. Too clean to be broken in. She hovered near the door for a moment, then made her way to a booth by the window, sitting a little too upright. She didn't see me, but I saw her. For a beat, I saw myself 2 decades earlier, new, rigid, eager to prove I deserved the uniform stitched with a borrowed name. She slid a notepad from her pocket, fingers quivering. I anchored my hand with the pen instead of putting ink down. From the booth behind me, one of the men let out another careless laugh. This time about someone else, another rumor. Another woman in uniform they didn't respect but felt entitled to discuss. I didn't react, just looked back down at the folder in front of me. The ink around Kendra's name had bled slightly into the paper, bright and unmissable. I closed the folder and pushed it aside. The coffee stayed cold, but something else had started to heat. Something quieter, steadier, not from the cup, but from the place between my shoulder blades where resolve builds when you've been underestimated too long. I left the diner with the folder pressed flat under my arm, its corners biting into my palm. Gravel cracked under my boots, sharp in the cold air. The base wasn't far, but the drive felt longer than usual, maybe because I already knew what I was walking into. By the time I came to the admin wing, the hallway lights hummed overhead sterile glow, washing the linoleum beneath them. My steps kept tempo. The file bit into my palm like it had teeth. A young lieutenant passed with a nod too stiff to be natural. Another offered a quick salute, eyes darting away before contact. Still learning how to exist here. No one mentioned the wedding. But they spoke around it, letting their pauses do the work. Conversations thinned as I passed. Doors that should have stayed open eased halfway shut. The kind of silence that sounded like people choosing to stay safe. I tapped twice on the last door. Our old signal. Unnecessary, but I still did it. Come in. Isaac Callan kept his eyes on the screen as I stepped in. 3 monitors glowed on his desk, numbers and charts, and unreadable rows pulsing quietly in blue and white. The overheads were off. A single desk lamp threw narrow shadows up the side of his face, outlining new lines under his eyes that hadn't been there last spring. "You're early." He finally glanced up. "Didn't sleep," I answered, setting the folder down between us. He leaned back, chair creaking. The lamp caught the edge of the folder as he opened it. The red marks were visible immediately. My circles were clean, precise, measured like always. He read in silence. Pages turned with soft flicks. Halfway through, he let out a slow breath through his nose. "She's really not subtle." I tapped the forged line with my finger. She never had to be. He flipped to the housing request, paused, his knuckles tensed. "Tier 3 officer quarters. That needs a sponsor." I said nothing. He angled the page toward me. My jaw tightened when I saw it again, even though I'd memorized the signature. Kolar's Nathan Hoyle. He's retired, I said. Last month. Isaac's brow furrowed. But this form, 2 weeks ago. He studied the ink more closely, then zoomed in on a scan he pulled up from the personnel archive. They lifted it from an older document. Copy-pasted. Clean job, though they even pixel-matched the artifacting. I didn't blink. She's not that clever. No, he agreed, but someone in her corner is. He closed the folder, leaned forward, elbows on his desk. You sure you want to move on this? It's not the first time, I said, voice flat. But it's the first time it reached my door. He didn't say I was exaggerating, didn't warn me about blowback. That's why I came to him. Isaac didn't waste time with doubts once you'd made your move. You'll need more, he said. I slid the file back toward him. I know. They won't bite on a housing form and a ghost signature. I don't need them to bite. I just need them to read. That made him smirk, but it didn't reach his eyes. You've changed. No, I said. I'm just tired of knowing the truth and leaving it buried. He offered the folder back, fingers lingering a beat longer than usual. I didn't take it yet. I looked at it, the stamped logo, the clipped edges, the way paper sometimes holds heat like it knows it matters. There's more behind this, Isaac said. She's just the pawn. I know who the hand is, I replied. Neither of us said the name. When I stepped back into the hallway, the usual traffic had picked up. Pairs of officers moved past talking about drill shifts and requisition errors. Nothing serious, nothing sharp. I walked on steps, firm uniform, silent. Near the end of the corridor, a young cadet with a buzz cut too short to be regulation paused mid-salute, confusion flashing across his face. General Elridge stopped. Let the question hang for a moment. He waited, still half-raised, unsure. It's Marin, I said. The rank is general. The mistake is Elridge. His hand faltered, then dropped. I didn't slow as I moved past the file back under my arm. The conference wing was just ahead, its double doors cracked like a breath held too long. And I was done whispering. The door clicked shut behind me. The projector bleached the far wall with charts the personnel distribution grid, stretching floor to ceiling like a blueprint too crowded to read at once. Around the oval table, 12 officers sat with shoulders squared, pens poised. The kind of posture that said they were listening, but only for what mattered to them. I held the head seat and kept to numbers, not nerves. One hand on the binder, the other near the remote. My jaw throbbed from tension, but I didn't let it show. There was no room for emotion here, only precision. Lieutenant Marks began first droning through routine updates like always. I nodded at the right moments, waited. Then it came. And per recommendation, Officer Kendra Thorne will be assigned as Deputy Liaison for Operations Planning Reporting to Major Halverson effective immediately. The table stayed stone-faced. No one asked why a novice was dropped into strategy. That was the dance. Everyone knew the steps. We just didn't say the music had changed. I let the rest play out. A few more assignments, a couple routine swaps. Then the room settled into chair scrapes and breathing. I stood. Thank you for the updates, I began voice level. One more item. I lifted the binder fingers, flipping to the tab labeled Irregularities. I've reviewed recent housing and placement approvals tied to Tier 3 access. Certain applications I paused, letting eyes drift up lack verification or include signatures from retired officers. Someone shifted in their chair. Another cleared their throat too softly to be called protest. I'll audit every file tied to these perks, I said, including those linked to superiors. The quiet carried farther than volume. Across the room, near the door, Kendra stood in civilian clothes. She'd skipped the uniform for a navy blouse and slacks, the kind of choice meant to read as equal, not subordinate. Her mouth opened slightly, closed. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The weight of the room had turned toward her, whether she wanted it or not. Chairs scraped back and the screen went dark. The room emptied in waves, some brisk, some hesitant, none eager to linger. By the time I stepped into the hallway, Kendra was gone. It was nearly 6:30 when her message came. "Can we talk my office?" I debated ignoring it, but this part was necessary. Her office sat 2 doors down from logistics, neater than mine, smaller. It looked prepared, not lived in, like a catalog page. She stood when I entered but didn't offer a chair. "I didn't think you'd," she started. "Make a scene," I offered. She hesitated. "Blow it out of proportion." I stared at her, not unkindly but without sympathy. "I didn't think you'd falsify documents." That landed. She backed toward the desk hands, ghosting across its surface like she needed it to anchor her. Her eyes flicked toward the window where sunset spilled over the training field, tinting the room gold without making it warm. "You know Dad wouldn't want, don't." It came out sharper than I planned. Her eyes flinched. "I'm not your sister in this room," I said. "Here I'm your CO." She tried again. But I stepped closer, not looming just enough to close the gap, just enough to remind her she couldn't retreat into family here. "You used a dead man's signature," I said quietly. "You wrote someone else's name into a post you didn't earn." Her breath caught. She didn't answer, just stood still, lips tight, the gold light cutting across one side of her face like a scar. "Who helped you?" She shook her head. Once. Again. Not in denial, just unwilling to unravel it. "I should go?" she murmured, turning toward the door. I let her reach it, let her fingers hover near the knob. "We're not family, Kendra," I said. "Not here. Not out there either." She paused, but she didn't turn. Outside the hallway buzzed faintly with a phone, ringing somewhere down the corridor, the kind of sound that went unanswered. She stepped out and let the door close behind her. The room was quiet now, still too tidy. I looked at the frame on her shelf, an old photo of her and my father, his arm around her shoulder, both in dress uniform. The glass caught the fading light, obscuring his face. I turned it downward and left it that way. Then I took the folder and walked out, boots striking tile with more certainty than anger. The air felt cooler beyond her office, and that was just fine by me. I climbed out with the folder wedged under my arm, cold threaded through the coat and into my ribs, Virginia cold, the kind that doesn't just touch skin, but settles in your lungs. I shut the door and started toward the path, the cemetery, just beyond the broken white fencing and rows of scrub trees that never really turned green. The path was the same, uneven, half-buried in wet leaves. Someone had trimmed the grass, but not well. The kind of job that looked done from a distance. I walked slowly, boots pressing into the damp earth, until I found her. Just a simple stone. Marla Elridge. Beloved mother. If they'd let me, I would have etched something else. Maybe she never flinched. Or she knew. "Hey, Mom," I said, lowering myself onto the small bench across from her grave. My knees popped like a worn hinge. I leaned forward, elbows on thighs, the folder balanced across my lap. Thought I should check in. Leaves brushed the toes of my boots, rustling like they had something to say. I kept my eyes on the stone and waited out the urge to speak. Not for a sign, I gave up on those a long time ago, but I opened the folder anyway and laid it beside me. The top sheet, Kendra's forged housing request, fluttered. Once, then went still. I pulled an old envelope from my coat pocket. Her handwriting, faded but unmistakable, spelled out, "For Marin." I'd kept it. Through deployments, through base transfers, through every reason to throw it away. The envelope finally tore open under my thumb, inside one piece of stationery. No greeting, no date, no signature. Just her upright, deliberate handwriting, the kind she used when emotion threatened to shake the lines. You don't need them to know who you are. But if they ever deny, you don't let them take the truth, too. Don't let them win twice. My throat cinched. The eyes held. I folded the paper back into the envelope, slipped it into the folder. From my other pocket, I pulled the old service pin she used to wear, brass eagle perched on an olive branch. The edges were dulled, the clasp a little loose, but the engraving was still legible. Fight when you must, but always clean. I pinned it just above the heart. Not for ceremony, not for her, for me. The folder sat like ballast, not a weapon. This wasn't about revenge, not really about Kendra either. It was about rot, the kind that settles in slowly until one day the rules don't mean anything anymore, until silence sounds like loyalty, until people forget what accountability is supposed to feel like. I stayed with her a while longer. Let the cold soak through. A church bell rang somewhere beyond the trees, noon maybe, or close enough. When I stood, the bench creaked and my knees barked. I brushed the leaves off and tucked the folder back under my arm. Back at the car, I slid behind the wheel and left the ignition alone. Pulled the tablet from the glove box and synced to the secure network. The screen glowed against my lap, waiting. I opened the file, scanned every page again, names, ranks, timestamps, the signature that didn't belong. Then I attached it to a new case submission. Recipient, Office of Disciplinary Review. I sent it past the base and admin straight to the disciplinary review office that doesn't bend. I pressed send. The tablet chimed once, and the status bar blinked. Submission received. That was it. No fireworks, no vindication. As I pulled away from the cemetery, wind kicked a swirl of leaves across the hood. They danced, lingered, then slipped off the glass. The road curved softly toward the main highway. The folder stayed on the seat beside me, heavy but lighter than before. I marched the folder to my desk and thumped it on the polished wood. Late sun threaded the blinds and pooled over the unopened pages. Fluorescence droned while the too-neat room pressed in around me. Too still, too orderly, like a box packed so tight you couldn't breathe inside it. The notification had come through an hour earlier, a reply from the Office of Disciplinary Review. I'd known it was coming, but the email still sat unopened on the screen while I stared at the folder. The investigation sat in limbo, neither closed nor opened. The memo hedged every verb and cushioned every clause. Insufficient grounds for disciplinary action at this time. Recommend further substantiation, including witness statements and motive clarification. They wanted more than forged documents. They wanted motive. They wanted me to explain why I'd broken the unspoken rule, don't name what everyone already knows. Don't touch the system. I pushed the folder away and slapped it flat on the desk. Pages shifted slightly, revealing a cream envelope tucked beneath the reports. It lay unsealed, heavy as old stationery. My name wasn't on it. It was from Kendra. I unfolded the note slowly. Her handwriting pitched hard to the right words, racing ahead of her nerve. I believe it would be best for all involved if I requested a reassignment. I never meant to disrupt the cohesion of our team. Please know this decision comes from a place of humility and respect. Beneath the letterhead typed in standard block font was the final line approved by Clayton Elridge, external advisor. The title hit with the quick sting of a palm to the cheek. That designation hadn't been valid in months. He'd withdrawn from consultative roles last spring, right after the third marriage was formalized. Another quiet exit arranged to avoid questions. But his name still opened doors, still got the rubber stamp, still protected her. Not mere favoritism and installed pipeline. This wasn't about some bruised family legacy anymore. This was deliberate. A quiet installation of privilege, a way to move her up without scrutiny after publicly erasing the one person who could contest it. It wasn't personal, it was political. A maneuver crafted by men who've known for decades how to rewrite authority using silence, legacy, and clerical ink. Get rid of the inconvenience, the distraction, the dissent. Smear her at a wedding. Let it spread. Make her disappear from the chain of authority while no one's looking too closely. I leaned back in the chair, the leather sighing under me, the pin on my chest pressed into my sternum solid and insistent. Fight when you must, but always clean. Mom wouldn't have been shocked. She would have called it what it was, cowards hiding behind signatures and blinds. My eyes slid to the wall to the nameplate above the desk. Line colon Marin Elridge, black and silver, standard issue. I stood. The plastic nameplate was cold in my fingers. I unfastened it from my uniform and set it neatly on the desk just above the opened envelope. Not a surrender, a declaration. That name never protected me. It never would. but I didn't need it anymore to justify my seat, my rank, or my presence in the room. Outside the window, the sun slipped behind the low buildings of the base. Amber light bled across the tile like the quiet end of something that didn't need mourning. I crossed to the door, slid the key off my lanyard, and hung it on the hook. No one would ask why. Not today. My boots drummed along the tile toward the closed doors ahead. The folder pressed firm into my ribs as I reached for the handle of the conference room. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, letting it shut behind me with a muted click. The air shifted, instantly tight, windowless humming with fluorescent light. Chairs lined one side of the table like sentries, a whiteboard leaning mutely in the corner. The projector stayed dark. No images, only facts, papers, signatures, waiting in silence. I sat at the head of the table. My palms lay flat against the varnished wood, not clenched, not restless, just anchored. Kendra was already there when I walked in, perched on the edge of her chair, as though trying to appear ready, but her spine betrayed her. Too straight, too still. Her blazer was buttoned too high, her hair pinned too tightly. She looked like someone clinging to rules for dear life. To her left sat the administrative oversight officer, Ms. Dillard. Stern woman, probably late 50s, with the kind of expression that had seen decades of men try to bluff their way out of trouble and failed. Her presence wasn't necessary for the content. It was symbolic. When she was invited to the table, the institution was paying attention. I opened the file slowly, letting the sound of the pages scrape the silence. No one spoke. Kendra Thorne. I began eyes scanning the top document. Current assignment, Departmental Strategic Liaison. Rank First Lieutenant. Housing Allowance Tier 3. Authorized by, I paused. A retired colonel, no longer in an active advisory role. Kendra didn't flinch, but her throat moved. Additionally, I continued sliding the next page forward. We found duplication of documentation. One submission via standard channel. One submitted separately with a different signatory and conflicting details. She drew in a breath like it might become a word. But nothing came out. Dillard didn't look at her, just took notes. I need to hear it directly, I said. This isn't just about a form. This is about misuse of internal systems, misrepresentation, preferential treatment, on government record. Kendra's voice cracked when it came. I didn't come up with the process. I followed it. Someone else guided me through. I thought she shifted. I thought it was how these things worked. Quietly, behind the curtain. And whose curtain is that? She hesitated. Your father, she said, barely audible. He offered help, said he knew the channels, said I should stop waiting my turn because I'd already earned it. A long silence followed. Then she added, I thought you, of all people, would understand. You were like me once. I watched her carefully. Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't even defensive. It was pleading. I was never like you, I said. I didn't have someone smoothing the way behind the curtain. I didn't even know the curtain existed, and when I finally saw it, there was no one waiting behind it for me. Kendra's gaze dropped to her lap. I don't hate you, I said quietly, surprising even myself. I hate the convenience with which people mistake the system for merit, and how quickly they forget those who had to prove their worth twice just to be called average. Across the table, Dillard cleared her throat. The documents are sufficient to begin a formal review. Lieutenant Thorne, your reassignment request will be processed under advisory status, pending investigation. Kendra's shoulders sagged slightly as if some inner structure had given out. She nodded, once stood and gathered the file with trembling fingers. No further defense. No final word. My eyes lingered on the glass panel, the faint outline of my reflection steady in its surface. I adjusted the folder under my arm and turned toward the exit, the sound of the latch clicking shut behind me. The door groaned and swung wide, releasing me into the hall. A draft of cool air slid past my collar as my boots struck the linoleum, each step louder than I'd intended. The mismatched folding chairs, white beige, all scuffed from years of service, were ringed around plastic-covered tables, set with trays of deviled eggs and sweating pitchers of sweet tea. I kept my face plain and my purpose plainer. Clayton stood near the front, flanked by people still calling him Coach or Sir or Mr. Elridge, depending on which decade they'd frozen him in. He wore the same navy sport coat from the wedding, now sagging at the shoulders, as if the lining had been stripped. Maybe he hadn't expected me to show up again, not after what he said, not dressed like this. His eyes hit the ribbons first, then my face. He glanced at the decorations, then at me. "You really gonna wear that in here?" Trying to make a statement embarrassed the girl some more, I drew a manila folder from my coat and unfolded the old document I'd carried for years. The edges yellowed, the signature still legible. His name in full on the line that relinquished paternity. Clayton didn't reach for it, just stared, then scoffed. "That paper is decades old. Lives changed, but the record remains." "Some lives changed," I said, "but not the system. Not the tools you use to erase one daughter and promote the other." His lips twitched a movement too small to be a smile. "You think coming here dressed like that makes people respect you?" "I didn't come for their respect," I said. "I came so they'd stop pretending they don't know." The room shifted, chair legs scuffing, jackets being adjusted, fingers flicking at phones without purpose. Not loud, but present. "You're not the only one with burdens, Marin," he muttered. I had to make decisions. "No," I said, cutting him off. "You made excuses." His jaw locked. His eyes flicked toward the circle of relatives, as if expecting one of them to step in. But they stayed rooted, some sipping from wax cups, others looking everywhere but here. Kendra stood near the punch table, her hands wrapped tight around a paper plate. She didn't speak, didn't move, but her gaze never left me. The silence stretched too long, poised to buckle something beneath it. I stepped past him and walked toward the far side of the room, past cousins who never remembered my birthday and uncles who suddenly found their shoes interesting. As I passed, a girl, 12, maybe 13, tugged her cousin's sleeve. "Is she like a real soldier?" "She's not just a soldier," the cousin whispered loud enough to carry. "She's a general." One of the older women hushed them sharply, but it was too late. I'd heard, so had everyone else. I said nothing, but the air changed, the volume dimmed, people sat straighter, conversations faltered. Clayton finally took a seat. I poured water and left the trays alone. When I turned, Clayton watched from across the room, arms folded, unreadable. I didn't give him anything back. No look, no nod. At the car, the window threw back my face under a skin of dust and streaks. I opened the door and slid inside the hinge, squealing faintly behind me, the silence tighter than the night air that followed. On the return, headlights stitched the dark and picked out the base fence. By the time I reached my office, late light pooled on the desk and lit the waiting folder. From the corner, the fax machine clicked, once then fell silent, a single page curled in its tray. I crossed the room and lifted the page from the tray. The header read, "Unit Oversight and Internal Ethics Division." The language was sterile review complete. Case to be elevated for full inquiry. Kendra's name printed in bold halfway down the page. My own name wasn't anywhere, but it was the emblem in the top left corner that held me. The same unit logo once embossed on my officer commendation, followed weeks later by a correction notice, "Recipient Marin Elridge." Clerical typo. That one letter had cost me the full citation. I still remembered the silence on the call when I'd asked if they'd fix it. They said it wasn't worth amending. The logo finally read as mine. I set the fax down gently and opened a drawer. A single unmarked envelope lay inside, no return address, no note. Just a sealed evaluation packet from the promotions board. It had arrived 2 weeks ago, intended for feedback. I hadn't opened it. Now I did. I broke the seal and flipped through the names. One made me pause. Lieutenant Emma Ralston, 28, graduated with distinction, deployed twice, passed over twice for strategic roles, too young, they'd said, too green, no mentor to sponsor her. In her interview, the collar sat a fraction high and the shoulders held like she had borrowed the jacket. Still, her eyes never left mine. She reminded me of myself before I learned silence was safer than correction. I pulled a clean request form from the bottom drawer. The lines were familiar. I'd filled out dozens like it usually for names sent from above or slipped to me by Clayton's old colleagues, names that came with handshakes and assumptions. Not this time. I wrote her name at the top. Under recommendation for I entered strategic coordination, regional lead. I filled in the rest deployments, tactical scores, review, performance. I didn't have to stretch a word. It was all there. My wrist trembled as I signed the bottom line. A soft, hesitant knock tapped the door. "Come in," I said. Isaac stepped in. Fatigues rumpled, holding 2 coffees from the logistics vending machine. "I figured you wouldn't leave that desk until after dark," he said, placing one beside the folder. "You figured right." His eyes moved from the fax to the empty envelope. The corner of his mouth twitched. "They're going to push the Kendra case upstairs." I nodded. "They'll try to be polite about it," I said. "They always are when power gets exposed for what it really is." Isaac lowered himself into the chair across from me. "And what about you?" I pushed the signed request form to the desk's edge. "She's better than I was at her age," I said. "She deserves the seat before they tell her she doesn't. You think it'll stick?" "No idea," I said, "but at least the paper will land on the right desk this time." He nodded and stood. No further questions. He left me alone again. I took the folder, tucked Emma's request form inside, and clipped a short note to the front in blue ink. "No legacy is better than a borrowed one." The fold bit against my thumb as I creased it shut. I marched the folder to personnel and thumped it on the polished wood of the manager's desk, then turned and left. The hallway outside smelled of dust and metal. I crossed into it, boots drumming along the tile, the last light of the day, slipping across the floor like something unburdened and fading. My boots carried me outside into open air, the draft from the hall giving way to the field behind the barracks. Rows of plastic chairs rasped under shifting bodies, each movement drawing a brittle protest from their frames. A breeze bent the grass and snagged on the loudspeaker's static, its crackle breaking the quiet just before the announcer's voice rose up. They'd kept the ceremony simple just the way I preferred it. No fanfare, no marching band, just a few chairs, a folding table draped in white metals arranged with military precision, and a list of names printed on cardstock someone had triple-checked for spelling. They called my name 8th. Elridge Marin, Lieutenant General. 20 years of service. Applause lagged a beat, then gathered, not from confusion, just from recognition delayed by expectation. That name always took a second to land. I rose and walked to the platform. My boots tamped the grass over soft, freshly turned dirt. No music, no cues. Just clapping steady and unforced. When I turned to face them, I spotted Isaac sitting 2 rows from the back. His arms crossed a quiet nod in place of a smile. A quiet pride you never request and always recognize. I took the pin, kept it a moment, then leaned to the microphone. "I'm not here to recount what I had to overcome," I said, voice holding steady against the tug of wind. "I just want to say this. There are people who never get called by the right name. And still, they stand." The air changed the way a page turns in a quiet room. As I stepped down, my eyes caught on the empty chair in the back corner. It had been reserved, though no one had dared to label it, but everyone knew. Clayton didn't show. Behind me, someone murmured he had been removed from the State Advisory Committee. Conflict of interest, they said. Others followed with stepped away voluntarily. But we all knew what those phrases really meant. Someone had finally looked hard enough. Kendra's name didn't come up at all. Not in the program, not in the whispers. I'd heard she filed for extended leave. No statement, no rebuttal, just absence. Like she'd learned what I had. Years ago, silence can scream louder than denial. I skipped the photos and the toasts, but I noticed the difference. People looked at me without flinching. They didn't glance away when I caught their eyes. Didn't falter when they nodded. It was subtle shoulders, a bit straighter tone, a touch clearer, but it was there. I wasn't Clayton's mistake. I wasn't the hard-ass officer, not anymore. I was a stayer, not a placeholder. After the ceremony, as cords were coiled and chairs folded, I turned toward my car. That's when I heard her. "Ma'am, sorry. Excuse me, ma'am." I turned. A young woman, maybe mid-20s, threaded her way through the dispersing crowd. Her uniform was pressed to perfection ribbons aligned like rules written in thread. But her voice cracked slightly like the question had waited too long inside her. She stopped a few feet from me. "I don't mean to bother you," she said. Are you the one who wrote that report last year? About the internal bias in female officer evaluations?" I blinked. It had been classified, redacted, buried, but enough people had seen it to know. "I am," I said, watching her shoulders lift with relief. "I've read it. Twice." Her words tumbled out. "I just wanted to say thank you. That report, it helped me stay." I gave her a small smile. Not out of politeness, out of recognition. I'd seen that look before. I'd worn it. "I didn't write it for recognition," I said. She nodded. "Then why did you?" "Because no one else did." She stood there a second longer, then nodded back once firm and vanished into the crowd. Her footsteps were light but purposeful. I stood alone again, the metal cool against my chest. The breeze picked up. The last chairs clattered as they were stacked. Sunlight angled low across the concrete. And I started walking, not toward the past, not toward some forced reconciliation, just forward. My boots carried me off the concrete and onto gravel, each step crunching underfoot until I reached the diner's door. It creaked the same way it always had a tired groan only old places know how to make. The bell above it jingled faint, just enough to announce someone had come in. No one looked up. They rarely did in places like this. The booth by the window was still there. Brown vinyl cracked at the edges. One side sagged more than the other, same as it did years ago when Mom used to sit across from me. One leg crossed her hand wrapped around a chipped white mug. She'd always insist on that spot. "I like watching the road," she used to say. "Gives me the feeling I can leave whenever I want." I took the same side she used to. Habit, I guess. Or maybe comfort. The waitress, short silver braid, and a name tag that read Lena, brought over 2 cups of coffee without asking. One full, one half full, like someone had already taken a sip. I didn't correct her. It was one of those afternoons that sits quiet in your chest. Not heavy, not loud, just still. The kind of day that gives you space to think without drowning you in it. Outside, the sky was shifting gold, peeling into soft gray. A few trucks rolled past on the highway, their engines trailing off like waves. I glanced at the second cup. Still steaming. It's strange how we look for people in places. I still catch myself scanning the room for someone who might say my name and mean it. Not read it off a form, not call it out in a roll sheet, but say it the way you say something that belongs to you. The truth is, no one ever does. Not really, but I've learned to say it to myself, to mean it when I do. That took longer than I'd like to admit. From the breast pocket of my jacket, I pulled out the old note, folded twice, creased at the corners. I'd stopped reading it for a while, thought I had it memorized. But some days you need to see the handwriting. You don't need to knock to enter. You're the one who rebuilt the house. Her script was small, slanted, nearly fading at the edges. I could almost hear her voice calm, never rushed the way she used to sound when she was sure I wouldn't believe her, but said it anyway. I folded the note again, slower this time, slipped it back into my pocket like a secret I was no longer afraid to carry. Lena came by with the check. I asked her if she remembered my mother. She paused, tilted her head. "The woman who always tipped exact change," she said. I smiled. That was her. She had a good way of sitting still. Lena added more to herself than to me. I scribbled something on the back of the receipt before sliding it across the table. "You matter, even if they don't say it." It wasn't just for Lena, or her. It was something I needed to write. Something I wished I'd heard earlier. Something someone somewhere might need when they sit at that booth one day and wonder if anyone sees them. I stood slowly. The chair creaked again like it resented being left behind. The coffee had gone cold in both cups, and no one had touched them. Outside, the air was cooler than before. Not harsh, just enough to remind you the day was winding down. I turned before opening the door, looked back at the booth. The chair across from mine was still empty. No one had come. No ghost had arrived to finish the coffee or speak words unsaid. But the sun had shifted. A soft blade of golden light slipped through the window, cutting across the seat cushion. It made the worn vinyl glow just for a moment. That seat wasn't waiting anymore, and neither was I. I pushed the door open and stepped outside. The gravel crunched beneath my boots, and the wind moved just enough to push my collar up. There wasn't anyone beside me, but for the first time, I didn't need there to be. I knew who I was, and I was still standing. Maybe your name was never forgotten, just mispronounced too many times. Maybe your seat at the table was always there, just covered by someone else's shadow. But the truth is, you don't need their permission to take up space. You get to decide who you are. You get to stay. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? What did you do with that silence? If this story stirred something in you or made you feel just a little more seen, consider subscribing. I'll be here telling stories that sound like your own, even when no one else dares to.